are just hours away from the CBS News Democratic presidential debate in Charleston, South Carolina. It's actually the final debate ahead of Saturday's crucial primary and before Super Tuesday. 7 candidates will take the stage starting at 8 p.m. Eastern. This is the order they'll actually be standing in from left to right. Tonight's matchup comes days after Bernie Sanders won the Nevada caucus. It leads in total delegates. I want to give you a look inside the Gilliard Center where the candidates will face off tonight. CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns is inside the hall. Caitlin, give us a sense of what's happening right now inside.
Hi, Rena. Well, we're in the room where it happens. We've covered a lot of these debates, and it's really cool to actually be in the theater, seeing these candidates go through the walkthroughs. We just saw Elizabeth Warren on the stage, kind of getting the preparations, seeing how things will go. Tom Steyer is actually on the stage right now doing his walkthroughs. So the candidates have been coming through, doing the walkthroughs here in the theater. This is a really incredible time to be having this debate because it comes at a really critical time in the campaign. Remember, the South Carolina primary is just a few days away, happening on Saturday. That primary is critical for these candidates because this is seen as the gateway to the Super Tuesday states. Those big, diverse states, California, Texas, are all have lots and lots of delegates up for grabs for these candidates. So just a week from today, we're already on to that contest. So there are several candidates who are going to be looking at tonight to really help to catapult their campaigns through Saturday and beyond.
Tell me, Caitlin, what will you be watching for tonight?
Well, Bernie Sanders, as you mentioned, is going to be front and center, right in the middle of the stage. He is considered now the front runner in this race, having just won those Nevada caucuses and the New Hampshire primary and having done well in Iowa as well. He's going into tonight with a big target on his back. Several of his rivals, especially Michael Bloomberg, really want to go after him. Michael Bloomberg is someone else that we're watching tonight because he did not have a good debate performance by all measures last week. His campaign says that they've been preparing for tonight, hoping to really keep the focus on Bernie Sanders and help winnow the field. And also because we're here in South Carolina, this is a really key test for Joe Biden. Remember, he's been calling South Carolina his firewall. Can that hold up? Tonight will be a critical night for him as well, because this is where he says his campaign really gets going.
Caitlin Huey-Burns at the debate site. Caitlin, we look forward to checking back with you throughout the afternoon. Thank you for joining us. And I want to turn now to my colleague Vladimir Duthiers, also in Charleston at the site of the debate. Vlad, go ahead, take it away.
Hey, Rena, good to see you. As you mentioned, it is going to be a barn burner of a debate. You're looking at a live picture right now outside of where we are, and I'm here right now with Lynda Tran and Leslie Sanchez. Of course, Lynda is a CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist. Good to see you both.
Yes. Great to be here.
Well, finally here with you on the set. It's been 4 years too long since I've been on the trail.
Just went by like that.
It really just did. All right, guys, so let's pick up with where Caitlin left off. Vice President Biden, he really needs a big win here. And Caitlin's been kind of on a tear about this, which is that, look, because I asked her earlier in the morning, if Vice President Biden comes in second, is that enough to keep going until Super Tuesday? And she says, and I think you'll probably agree, Lynda, that no, because they have made it a narrative of their campaign that this is where he plants his flag. This is his firewall. This is where all things happen. This is where it all flows into Super Tuesday. And he makes the case as to why he's the best candidate to take on Donald Trump. Is she right?
She's 100% right. And I would go even further and say not only does he have to win, he has to win big. We're talking double digits here. This is the narrative that his own campaign set about how it sets him apart from the rest of the pack, that he has this appeal with black voters in particular that is very different from the rest of the field. And if he doesn't really win big here, it sends a terrible message about the centerpiece of his campaign, this notion of electability, that he's different than the rest.
Both of you guys love to dig into the numbers, and I'm curious, Leslie, what do the numbers show about why former Vice President Biden's numbers have eroded specifically here in South Carolina?
Well, specifically, you have so many Democratic centrist candidates who are occupying that lane, right? They're splitting the vote among all of them. Even if you look at Nevada, Bernie Sanders is getting like a clean shot on the progressive lane when you've got 3, 4, 5 candidates splitting a little bit, some cases 4%, some cases 19%, with Steyer, upwards towards the 20. That makes a significant impact, and the fact that Steyer is moving so well with African-American voters. But look at the reasons he's done it. The campaign, it's not just optics, but the ground operation is really key. These are candidates that understand they hired influencers who came around. They were passing a lot of dollars around in urban radio, black businesses, particularly in South Carolina. They're really trying to learn the infrastructure and what makes this state, so productive. And if you do that, I think communities respond. They're making a very serious effort. When you don't do that, as in the case of maybe a Klobuchar or people that just don't have the familiarity or the dollars to do so, it has a very big impact. So that's why I do expect Biden to do extremely well because of his long, consistent record of understanding what we just talked about. But I don't think he has to win African American. I don't think he has to win South Carolina. I'm looking to how it leverages him to the quasi-national election that is Super Tuesday.
I just had an interview with the National Press Secretary for Vice President Biden's campaign, and I asked him about something that's sort of dogging the former vice president right now. He's made some comments in a couple of instances on campaign stops that he was arrested back in 1977 in attempting to see Nelson Mandela in South Africa. And I wanted to know, is it a slip up? Because his National Press Secretary, TJ Ducklo, said, I'm not familiar with what may have happened. And it's curious to me, and I asked him, is this a way to ingratiate himself with African Americans? Because the campaign and the former vice president has said that people of color in this state love him, and they associate him with Barack Obama, who's very popular in the state among Democrats. So why say something like that if it's not true? And if it's a mistake or if it's a fumbling, why repeat it a couple of times? Not able to get a strong answer. So things like that, they can actually also erode at a candidate's viability, because we saw that happen back in 2008 with Hillary Clinton and her claims that she'd come under sniper fire.
I would just say that I think the strongest thing he's got going for him is the one thing every other candidate wishes they had going for them, which is he's the only one who can say affirmatively that he would carry on Barack Obama's legacy. And that is a name that here and in
that carries a lot of weight.
Exactly. Here and in other states that are going to be a factor on Super Tuesday means something. I mean, just witness the barrage of campaign ads that we've been seeing here on the ground in South Carolina and other places where you would think Barack Obama was on the ballot himself. He appears everywhere. It's, B-roll of him walking alongside the candidates and whatnot. But Joe Biden is the only candidate who could put out an ad that is literally Barack Obama's words as he awarded him the medal at the end of his administration, talking about how you couldn't have asked for a better vice president and that he was by my side through all of the big wins that we had and helped me lead this nation. I mean, that is the best quasi-endorsement that one could have anywhere, much less here in South Carolina, where we know that the electorate is more than 60% African American, and they love and they miss Barack Obama.
And there was a silver lining for the former vice president in Nevada, Leslie, in that he won double digits with African American voters, even though Bernie Sanders actually won that state. So can we expect that he's able to hold on to that, even though Senator Sanders has made some significant inroads here in South Carolina?
Sanders made significant inroads for the same reason he did really well in Nevada. So I would think that's idiosyncratic to Nevada, because Nevada, he put a tremendous. Sanders put a lot of money starting in 2016 in Latino grassroots. He was holding kind of caucus town halls on how to caucus. They were doing them entirely in Spanish. They were doing Spanish language ads, almost $1 million in 2016, and he continued that. So when you ask voters in exit polling, even anecdotally, why did you vote for Bernie Sanders? Many of them like him, but they're like, he's the only one we know. So that was a really kind of weighted advantage. You don't see that here, but in African American, it is distinctly different. But the campaign tactics are the same, right? Money on the ground, money with influencers in terms of like getting and garnering their support, commitment to certain programs that they know communities want to see. So he is competitive, but does that when the centrists are trying to pierce that bubble, what I think voters are looking for is authenticity. Are they going to really deliver on that? I think that's where Biden has the advantage. He has a record. He can say, you know who I am, you know what I represent, and you know I'll deliver. With some of the other candidates, you don't know. So the blend and how that comes out tonight's debate is going to be really critical.
Let's talk about some other controversial comments that were made by Senator Bernie Sanders in an interview that he gave to 60 Minutes and Anderson Cooper, which he is catching a lot of heat for on both sides of the aisle. Both Republicans and Democrats, specifically in the state of Florida, have come out and said that they do not like the comments that he made with regards to Fidel Castro and the literacy programs that Castro may have implemented when he became the leader of that country, essentially a dictator. Will that dog his campaign? And Leslie, were you surprised that both Republicans and Democrats in Florida specifically came out and condemned those remarks?
In one sense, that's the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, the fact that Bernie Sanders is embracing himself around, the dictator that's Castro is really astonishing. And politically, that is the kind of fumble that you really don't want to make. Looking at a strategic state like South Florida, or like Florida, particularly South Florida, that I-4 corridor, Broward County, areas where you have Democratic, voters who are not aligned particularly with Trump. But when they see that contrast of endorsing and kind of embracing the Castro policies and that regime, that's a red line for them. And that pushes, and it really, from a polarizing perspective, it pushes the weight back in the other Republican direction. It is a dramatic step. Democrat, Republican, that is a red line you don't cross.
Leslie, let's talk about the front runner, Senator Bernie Sanders. He has taken also some heat from Senator Elizabeth Warren, who has hit him time and time again on the debate stage about how he plans to pay for his Medicare for All plan. And the senator has pointed out that he expects to raise taxes, but he's never really been specific about how he plans to pay for it. Is that, it doesn't seem to have had a drag on his campaign at all. Should it?
Well, it's been interesting that it's taken this long for folks to ask him exactly how do you plan to pay for these massive structural systemic changes that you keep talking about, specifically Medicare for All. And so as of yesterday, his campaign put out a checklist that basically says we estimate that it's going to cost around $30 trillion over the next decade to enact Medicare for All. And then his checklist, which says here's the revenue that's going to offset this, only adds up to $17.5 trillion.
Right.
And so if that isn't taken on from the debate stage tonight, it is political malpractice from the other candidates on the stage. We saw how big of a difference it made on Elizabeth Warren's early rise when there were questions raised about how she was going to pay for some of these big, expansive ideas that she had. And you would expect the same to happen to Bernie Sanders. The only problem and the only question I have is it just too late at this point, right? There's also this other broader narrative about how Bernie, is the one to beat. It's his race to lose, and he's got the wind at his back at this point. And maybe the policy stuff just gets lost in the mix.
Well, Lynda has talked about this for a long time in terms of you've got Warren and you've got Sanders, and they're talking about both things. And Lynda, in terms of raising taxes, that's really the mantra. Why hasn't there been more pressure on Sanders when he's saying things that will dramatically affect middle-class families? Any family making over $29,000 will likely see a tax increase. People are going to talk about that. Or nationalizing private industry. Some of this dramatic things. It's okay to talk about free college and free health care, but when you get to the details of how you pay for it, that's when voters really start paying attention. They're like, oh, it's great if it's free. Oh, wait, I have to pay for that. It's like buying into the plan. That's not exactly what I signed up for.
Right.
That's where I think the leverage and opportunity is for the other candidates tonight.
Yeah, and I guess, to put a button on our discussion around Senator Sanders, I mean, the reality is you get a lot of people, a lot of his supporters get very aggressive on social media, and that's been reported. And oftentimes the aggression comes like this. Look, I just know that Senator Sanders is fighting for my health and my right to have a healthy life, and he intends to put in this Medicare for All plan, and you can understand why I'd be upset and emotional about having health care. But I wonder, how do you get that passed if you don't win the United States Senate and perhaps you lose the House? Should he be elected?
Or if you were unable to enact the same kind of legislation in your home state, how is it that you expect to get something like that done at any time in American history, much less this most polarizing of moments that we find ourselves in? I think it's a very legitimate, practical question. That's not to say that we shouldn't, aim for the stars and shoot for something that is better than what we have today. But I think it's logical and realistic to ask, how are you going to get there? And I think that's the point that Senator Klobuchar has tried very hard to drive home at previous debates.
No, the centrists are saying, wait a minute. And even Biden, for example, I was in that process. I was in those rooms. I was in those negotiations. That was never going to happen. Just the fact we got Affordable Care Act passed is astounding. Let's fix what didn't work. And some of those provisions. And guess what? All of those things that didn't work had to do with cost. All of those had to do with raising taxes, raising premiums. We already saw a rise rise in premiums. We already saw the inability to go to the doctor that you wanted, that they said you could keep your doctor and you couldn't. I don't think America's ready to rupture that further, but maybe find a way where you're getting secure and comfortable with a plan where you can add value to it as opposed to ripping it out again. That frightens people. It frightens our markets, quite honestly. And that's what you're jeopardizing on the Bernie's call.
Absolutely.
All right. Leslie Sanchez, Lynda Tran, always great to have you guys here, especially here in South Carolina.